Hey everyone. We're just going to get started here. You are here for our panel, ChefConf Media and Analyst panel. My name is Alex Williams. I'm founder and editor-in-chief of The New Stack. And I'm here with some of my colleagues who I'd like to just introduce quickly. Why don't we just go right along, Mike?
Hi, my name is Mike Kravis. By day, I'm a cloud architect at Deloitte. By night, I'm an analyst.
Hi, I'm Beth Pariseau. I'm a senior news writer with TechTarget, and I cover DevOps.
Hey, I'm Torsten Volk, the guy with the bad German accent. I'm I'm an analyst, research director at Enterprise Management Associates. Areas of coverage, everything that has to do with lowering IT operations cost and releasing software quicker and cheaper and at better quality.
My name is Krish Subramanian. I'm the founder of a boutique analyst firm called Research, focused on modern IT stacks. My only connection to DevOps comes from my previous avatar as a product guy in a DevOps startups in Seattle.
Great. First, I'd like to know who we have here. Tell me, if you raise your hands, are you a developer? No? DevOps, would you say? You're DevOps? In marketing or communications? Okay. All right.
Operations?
Operations?
Oh.
Yeah.
Fine.
Great. Well, great. Well, I was thinking about this discussion today, and one of the things I love about these conferences, I get to get together with my colleagues, and one of the favorite things I think we just like to do, and we just don't even talk about, is just banter. You know, you just kind of like, you know, talking about this, talking about that, talking about DevOps, talking about containers, talking about serverless, talking about all these different things, and basically, the way I was talking about with Christian is like, we have no skin in the game. You know, we don't really have any skin in the game whatsoever. So people will come to us and they'll ask us what we think, but most of the time it's based on the past 4 or 5 people that we've talked to, because that's just the way, because we're just talking to so many people all the time. But we definitely do have perspectives on it, and one of the things that I'm noticing, and I love just to get you guys thought about it, is sure, DevOps is changing. DevOps is changing a bit, I think, with container technologies. I think there's maturity that we're seeing in how you think about container technologies, and how you kind of use the tools that come with container technologies, because you're still going to need DevOps practices to really understand how the tools work in many respects. But now we have like this dual kind of surge happening with serverless technologies, for example. And so I guess that's my question, is what's the intersection there? You know, what is happening between DevOps, you know, on one plane, which really speaks to, I think, configuration management, and it speaks to a whole nother, you know, a lot of other concepts that we're quite accustomed to. So I'm just curious, you know, what is the future of DevOps in that context when we're thinking about, you know, this duality that we're seeing more and more in the market?
Yeah. DevOps, sort of like the term DevOps, in my opinion at least, came into picture when public cloud became the norm and developers started building applications and deploying directly to virtual machines on public cloud. So with containers and then serverless, what is happening is the abstraction levels are going up. That is sort of shrinking the pipeline compared to what it was when developers were deploying it to virtual machines out there. So from the way I look at it, like in the past, I used to work in Red Hat in the OpenShift team. So talking to customers, the way I look at the pipeline shrinking in the case of containers is, as a developer, I package everything I need on my laptop, push it to a repository, and the testing team takes it from there, and eventually, when everything is okay, like it goes to production right from there. Sort of like the pipeline, we have sort of bypassed the need for continuous integration with the embrace of containers. At least that's
Wait. Bypass the need for continuous integration? What are you talking about? Jenkins is as popular as ever.
Yeah, Jenkins is popular, but
and yeah, true. You're going to still need something to collect all this raw data and more of these kind of distributed architecture environment. But continuous integration is just—it's not going away. That's like saying configuration management is going to go away.
No, the continuous integration. If you are a pure container shop, you don't really need to have a separate tool like Jenkins to do continuous integrations. the developers can do it on their laptop and do it, but it's not happening the way all the container evangelists hope for. Like it's not containers everywhere. So you have a heterogeneous mix of virtual machines, containers, and serverless technologies. That's why Jenkins is still there, and continuous integration hasn't gone away. But it's sort of creating a sort of quite a chaotic, brings in some kind of chaos in the definition of DevOps.
So Beth, you put this into perspective here at this event. We're at ChefConf. We're talking about their tools like Habitat.
Yeah.
And they now talked about the operator where it fits with Kubernetes. I see something like that and I get a little kind of confused. It's like, is now Kubernetes going to be the control plane with an operator? Or is it that Habitat is a separate control plane? But even besides that, how do you kind of make sense of all these things when you're kind of like going out there when you're doing your reporting?
That is something that comes up, and when there are a lot of people still kind of getting their arms around Habitat in particular, and I think that there is a need for Chef to clearly articulate those differences. But Habitat is focused on packaging applications. I think of it as analogous to another open source utility by Heptio called KSonnet, which is about putting apps onto Kubernetes. So that's how I think of the level of abstraction that Habitat is working at. It's more about the application and replacing application cookbooks within the traditional Chef tools than replacing containers as infrastructure. And as far as containers and serverless, in a world where mainframes are still running, that nothing's going away. I actually started looking into containers versus serverless last year when, first containers came roaring up with the Doppler effect, and then all of a sudden serverless came up even faster. The pace of change in technology these days is just bewildering. So there were a lot of people trying to figure out, do we go to containers or do we leapfrog that and go to serverless? And for a lot of enterprise organizations that have to deal with those mainframes and that legacy that's still kicking around, containers are an easier pill to swallow because they're still a unit of compute, but it gives you a little bit more of that flexibility and agility with modern applications and microservices. And to your point, it kind of forces some of that microservices thinking. Having containers doesn't equal microservices, but a lot of microservices best practices fit more easily into containers, and containers tend to lend themselves more easily to those best practices and that mindset.
Okay, I have a quick question for the audience. How many of you out here are actually Habitat users? Oh, how many people? Oh, so would you mind telling us how you're using it? Would you be okay with that? And just telling us how a little, giving us a little bit of insight. This might help draw out some more conversation.
Hi, I'm Gino. I work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So our team of infrastructure engineers was able to build an app for one of the program teams. And it was a simple little application. I believe it was, I'm trying to remember, it was done in about 2 weeks. And it was a prototype, something that we were looking to build to just establish a pattern and a behavior so that we can continue to use Habitat more. And this is about 4 or 5 months ago. I don't have too many details on that right now. But
sure. I guess the question is, why did you decide to start using Habitat? Why didn't you just go straight to Kubernetes? Or do you use Kubernetes as well? Or are you just trying a lot of different things right now?
So the name on the side of the building kind of dictates a little bit of some of the things that we are able to use and look towards. But for the most part, there's a lot within that Microsoft stack that isn't there yet.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to, I guess, fly under the radar a little bit to be able to try and get things quicker to our business partners than otherwise.
Thank you. Torsten, I was curious from your perspective actually about this question about Chef and Habitat, and I have some notes here, and I think this kind of comes directly back to you. So do people need things like Chef or Habitat when they have Kubernetes? Aren't containers immutable? When and why is configuration management needed? This was a this was a subject matter that you had kind of said that might be interesting to talk about. And I think in this context, it makes sense.
Yeah, it is a question that we keep hearing. I mean, who here is using containers similar to VMs versus immutable? I mean, who uses storage drivers for databases, for writing permanent files to containers in the audience? Who's using it for legacy? Nobody.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Who's using it, and who's using it for cloud native? Okay. What are the others using it for?
They're using serverless.
All right. No,
Who's using serverless?
I know. Have to make a joke.
Yeah.
Serverless? Okay. So yeah, this abstraction between the application and the underlying infrastructure, basically this contract between the application that has requirements in terms of compliance, in terms of performance, availability, all of those requirements that the application has, management, it cannot run on a server that is not patched at least every X number of days, all of those things. They should not depend on whether that is Kubernetes or whether that is running on serverless, because there's also still servers that run a container framework, probably Kubernetes, at the bottom. So this abstraction of managing the application and describing what the application needs, and then the application basically searching for a home based on those requirements, that is the interesting piece. And Kubernetes is just a commodity. Kubernetes is, it's like vSphere, right? It's great, it scales well, it has open APIs, it has a large community, a little bit like OpenStack, and it gives us something that OpenStack didn't give us, and that is the ability to, to have containers, to share one operating system. But that's basically it. The real value is up the stack that we see, and it's really in automating the application, because you can see that when somebody has Kubernetes for a long time or for a couple of years, then we often really see the same problems that we saw with virtual machines. And yeah, I don't want to say it's another hypervisor, it's a container hypervisor, but it is not solving the problem, in my opinion.
So Mike, when you work with Deloitte, and like you're often working with, well, actually, who are you working with inside enterprise organizations, and how is kind of this concept of DevOps evolving when you're talking, as you see when you're talking to customers?
Well, usually when we talk DevOps, it's not just about the tooling, not just CI/CD, right? CI/CD is a piece of it. Usually it's the entire software development lifecycle, end-to-end, the people and process that go with it. But referring back to this conversation, when to use this tool or that, there's this myth, and we kind of create it, we're at blame because we write about what's new.
Yeah.
But you go in these organizations and 1% of the apps are using what's new, and 99% are using what's old. So a lot of what we talk about just goes zoom over there. And
right.
the real key to DevOps is to have a standard way of doing software development lifecycle that involves collaboration between all the groups, that requires quick feedback loops, smaller teams, smaller deliverables. The tools just enable that. But the challenge is, people out here get hammered with serverless and containers and all that, and there are groups using that, but the reality is there's this 30 years of legacy we have to deal with at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like most people in this room are part of that 99%. Would that be true? It really is true. I mean, so I mean, this is the. So how many of you say carriers you're just trying to learn it? You're just learning right now, just trying to figure this all out, and just having there it is, there it is, there it is. Yeah.
And who's using Kubernetes in production?
No one.
No, not a single one.
No one.
Pretty close. Oh, one.
Oh yeah. Who are you with then? Huh.
So let me ask you a question. There's a lot of work involved to get Kubernetes in productions. And a lot of people, the reason for Kubernetes is we want to be agnostic to the cloud providers. But have you ever tried using the cloud provider's container management service and solve that same problem in like a day instead of months? So what's the how much weight do you put on being portable? I'll put that in quotes, versus getting stuff to market, because you can go to the next cloud provider and use their container management service and get to market pretty fast too. So I'll ask everyone that. Sometimes we put so much on being agnostic that we don't get anything done.
Well, what do you think? I mean, is that part of your paradox that you face too?
Well, for us, we kind of have a bit of everything. So what we find is that we still got our legacy stuff, which mainly runs on bare metal. So most of our infrastructure is bare metal. But we have OpenStack, we have Kubernetes. We run more of it, and it's again small teams that are running it, and we're doing larger things with it. But most of our infrastructure is still bare metal. So for us, we're all starting expanding in these areas, but we don't know where the evolution will be. So we're kind of mixing on all these types of platforms to try out and see. That's one of those ones where we're like, well, let's wait and see what happens to see whether it's something that is going to be uptaken and used. So that for us, that's what we found as well. And so we've got teams that are doing these and doing things like Kubernetes, which is probably the biggest now, probably of our infrastructure. But we're still using pieces of everything.
So, Krish, how do you approach your work when it's like this? I mean, you know, you've been covering this world for a long time. You've been on the vendor side, right? And you know, working at Red Hat. And this room, I think, is kind of testament to often what we don't see in our daily work, right? And because really to find out those true stories, you got to be out there. I mean, really got to be out on the ground, basically. So how do you balance that? I mean, from an analyst perspective, to try to help people, you know, in the way you try to communicate these concepts and helping people understand and explain them.
I think the theme of this conference, "Do Change," explains everything. It may still be that 1% of the people are really using containers and serverless, but they have to change much faster than what they are hoping for. Like if they don't change, a technology company is going to come and disrupt them completely. So this need to change is going to drive faster embrace of technologies. But with so many new technologies coming out overnight, I think we will see some skipping of generations. Probably what they are trying out there is trying to see which one is going to fit for them well. So I would say, like, go with first bring in a cultural change where you want to sort of change, have the change mindset. Don't worry about breaking things. I think Chef theme for this conference is perfectly aligning with what they should be doing. Expect change. You force change in your organization. Don't worry about breaking things. Just try it out.
So I'm going to keep going back to everyone here and asking the question based upon what Krish said is like, how much of your time is spent just managing existing infrastructure? 75, 80, 90%? How much time do you actually get to spend on innovation then? What are you like trying to, 5%, 10% of your, I would say less than 1%. Yeah.
When you ask that question, could you please, I would like to hear the response from other speakers too as well. So what do they think about, the question you asked Krish, I would like to hear other responses as well before you open up the door.
All right. No, well, okay. I was just trying to get a perspective on what Krish was saying here to see if it correlates with what the audience is finding as well.
Are you willing to change? That is the question.
And it's just getting context to try to understand. So, but maybe Torsten, maybe you could take it from there. You know, kind of that. You know, when you're out there and you're trying to think about these, you know, the innovation cycles that we're seeing out in the market, and how is your job as an analyst? What is it that you're trying to help them understand about these new tools, about these new technologies, if they are moving so rapidly?
And that is a great question. I have so many examples where I talk to people who basically said, look, I think those things it's like window shopping, right? At a store where you can't afford a lot of the things. I would love network virtualization. I would really like to have Kubernetes containers. And of course, I would like to run everything I can on Lambda. But I just don't have the guys for this. My guys are good, my guys are clever, but they're holding everything together as it is. So can you as an analyst show me what I can do to get out of that spiral, right? And I also love the concept. I started as a developer, and I love the concept of the show, of breaking things and then reinventing them and breaking them again. But a lot of companies have a ton of legacy that they can break, and running it on Kubernetes. I remember at the beginning of Kubernetes, I was talking to data center guys and said, "Ooh, when are you going to containerize your stuff?" Right? And they were laughing. And then you stupid analyst. Why should I do that? Well, you gain density, right? Started to laugh. Well, servers are cheap. Well, you gain security. Started to laugh. We don't know anything about container security or security between microservices, right? So there's a lot of a learning curve, and I think what I always like about this show last year and this year is that this is about attacking the real problem, right? I played with InSpec yesterday, and my question always is, why doesn't everybody use InSpec? It is so great, right? And the answer is, I found that out again, because you cannot just download a GDPR package and deploy 5,567 controls and check your whole environment at all the levels, right? You have to customize it to your organization. You have to even interpret the law. It's a really long document, and you have to decode it yourself. So once you have it, it's unbelievable, right? You can just push a button, and you get immediate compliance reports, and you could release right away. But to get to that point, that is just way far beyond somebody's reach, and that's what I keep seeing when I talk to the real guys.
So Beth, you've been covering the space for a while now, and and we were talking just beforehand about your beat, and one of the things you find exciting about it is this kind of fast pace of change, right?
Yeah.
So in the past 2 years, what have you seen change at striking to you? Is it that container? Is the container story? What is it? What are those stories that you recall that kind of speak to what we've seen evolve over the past 2 years?
So I've been covering IT for 12 years, which in internet time is like 30, I have never seen change accelerate to the pace that it has accelerated to over the last 2 years. I spent 5 whole years covering just storage. Then I spent 2 covering server vert.
Was that like being in Siberia?
Maybe I'm just a sick person because
But
I
you
didn't
liked
mind it. But
well, once you get into it, I mean, as a veteran daily journalist once said to me, he's like, listen, you may think that sewers are boring, but when you start learning about sewers, it kind of gets interesting.
Well, and like sewers, it's a really important piece of
Plumbing.
the infrastructure. It's key.
Yeah.
The pace of change, as far as how people deal with it, my honest answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
Because my whole job is keeping up with this market, and that's enough. But I don't also have to run a data center at the same time. And I don't know, especially people who are in developer and DevOps roles, they're so bombarded with marketing from every vendor that wants to be their one-stop shop for everything and tell them to automate all the things. And it's like they're trying to put out a fire at the same time. I don't know how people deal with it. It's kind of an unresolved question in the industry is like, how are we going to keep skills up with the pace of technological change? How are we going to address training and education? And that's a question people kind of have been bandying about for a couple of years now, and everybody seems to kind of frown and agree it's a problem, and then nothing really changes. But it's definitely an open question as far as I'm concerned, how people get the skills to wrap their hands around this stuff while still keeping the lights on.
Mike, Mike, I'm curious, you must talk about this a lot with people.
Yeah, I mean, when DevOps first became a term, it was mostly developers and engineers, grassroots, but now, C-level's investing in it, and it's all about agility, and it's business agility. So, we talk about all the tools and technology, but at the end of the day, businesses are like, if we don't move fast, some startup's going to come in and take a piece of our business, or a competitor who's advancing is going to take our business. So you have to be able to accelerate, and part of it is what Chris was talking about, is the technology keeps changing. So you have to, as a culture, expect that the tools, the technologies are going to change. You have to design for that. If we look at containers, when containers about 4 or 5 years ago came out, it was the hottest thing, it was great. But then we started to go to production, and it became complex. So then this ecosystem built, and then you got to take care of moving databases and networks. It became real complex, and everyone's diving into that, and Kubernetes, and boop, serverless pops up. oh, let's jump on that. We start doing that, and all of a sudden, orchestration for all these functions become complex. Well, guess what? In another year or two, someone's going to abstract that, and there's going to be something else. And you just have to expect that. So, but if you're in a culture that's married to a technology or is going to ride it, put your chips on one and ride it, it's not going to be. We live in a world where everything changes. It may make sense to use and spec for this, but this architecture over here may not need that. So you just have to be able to accommodate all these different things.
So either accept it, have patience, or look for a new job.
Yeah.
Well, you can be the COBOL developers who are fading out and hang on to the legacy that'll pay for a while, but really we should be going to work to help advance our business, right? And if not every business needs to be agile, but many of them do, and technology is a big enabler of that.
Yeah. I would say the TLDR answer to that question is have an evolutionary mindset where you're ready for change, and don't approach it from a tool point of view, approach it from what your business needs to solve that problem. I think with that plus the evolutionary mindset should help you go with the change much more faster.
But we've been hearing that for years, Krish. We've been hearing that for years.
Yes.
Why is it different now?
For
How
years,
is that new?
for years, like even if you just ignore it for a while, you could wake up one day and still be able to sort of patch here and there and be on top of the game. But that's not happening anymore. You are getting disrupted by companies that don't own anything in that vertical. So you have to be agile right now.
Any questions?
Yeah. So first question I have is, you mentioned GPS and other things with regards to compliance.
Mm-hmm.
You find that a lot of engineers now are being tasked with a lot of compliance finding work. And half the battle is going back to the auditors going, hey, so what did you mean by this?
Mm-hmm.
And then having to translate again back into inspect code and then turn around and say, oh, that's not what you wanted? So my first question is, do we see a trend toward having more of an operationalized arm of compliance to actually help do the coding so the people that actually understand the things that we're auditing against are actually the ones doing the auditing code? Or are they continue to foist it upon the operations and development teams for them to play guesswork? And I have one second question as well.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I just read again the whole GDPR on Saturday, and I thought, man, I'm so glad I don't have to do any work. I'm just an analyst, right? But I just said to somebody here, I had an in-depth deep dive with Inspec last night, and I was thinking about how to codify how many controls each of the 150 or so articles give you. And the number is, depending on your organization, in the thousands. And you cannot keep those current unless you get the operations guys up to speed on that. And when I look at what there is, everybody says, oh yeah, that's so easy to code. And it looks good, right? And it is easy to code, but there's so many, it's almost like programming, but on it's compliance as code, right? It's still coding. So the ops guys, with their knowledge, you absolutely need them because the developers cannot do that. So if you are too small to have a compliance team, you have to get the operations guys trained to some level, and that's why this is so little used at this point, and that's why we have to make that easier and easier and easier. And I was pushing for templates, like a GDPR template. 8,000 controls that you can just drop on there. It doesn't exist, right? At some point, I'm hoping there is at least something that you can customize. Run a check on all of your clouds. I mean, this looks great, right? It was GCP and AKS and ECS, Amazon Container Service, whatever. Yeah. It looks great that you can now pull all of them, right? So you have kind of that abstraction layer resolved, but now you have to get all of those rules, and then they change, and that is a court. When you talk to those consulting firms, right, what they do is they keep their customers also up to date on the latest law, right? There's a court case against somebody. I mean, it starts on Friday, right? And there will be court cases, there will be investigations and all of that, and the next set of controls will be derived from the outcomes there. So technically, this is quite a big burden on operations, but it's really on operations. You had another question?
Yeah, the other question is more towards DevOps, how it's been driven more from a C level now. A lot of times, being from more of the originally from the operations side, a lot of people were like, hey, we're not communicating enough. Do you find like it's more from a now a development side or an operations side where the other side's, hey, you guys really need to come to us a little bit more because we're trying to reach out to you, but you're still operating in your silos?
I'm going to try to answer both questions with this answer here. To the first part, what I see a lot, and again, I'm working with banks and healthcare mostly, highly regulated, is they create their platform on top. We call them guardrails. So the developers will be inheriting a lot of the controls that are put in place, and not putting the burden on the developer. They still have to handle their app, but the infrastructure level down, that's all handled by usually a cloud platform team. But the big DevOps change, culture change there is you have to ingrain in the platform team that their customers, the developers. If you don't do that, you still have the same war you've always had. The other part is now out in the business units where you have developers, what the companies that are moving along the maturity curve in DevOps are starting to have full stack teams. I think a full stack engineer is a unicorn, right? But they're getting people, whether they report
or a unikitten.
yeah. But whether they still report in silos or they totally reorg doesn't matter. But there's a team in the business unit to have security people, ops people, SRE, all that stuff in there. But it's a maturity curve. They don't always start there. But
Right.
if you ever go to like the DevOps conference and you see some of these companies, they've been talking every year, and if you just compare their talks, how they progressed from dev and ops to a manager over here that owns both dev and ops, that's a multi-year transition. But that's where I see things going. It's the whole thing of DevOps is continuous learning, continuous feedback, open, honest feedback. So you start somewhere. Where's the bottleneck? Well, the bottleneck's in tier 1 support. Let's go figure that out. And they just keep iterating, and eventually you start to see full stack teams as opposed to dev and ops. But it's a long, tough battle, and it takes a lot of leadership to break down those barriers.
So Beth, I'm curious about the coverage that you guys are doing at TechTarget. How would you compare the amount of coverage you do for Kubernetes and containers versus configuration management technologies such as Chef?
Depends on when you're talking about, but lately I sometimes feel like I'm on the Kubernetes beat.
Yeah.
Because anything with that word in the title gets mad eyeballs. So, it's the hot new hotness right now that people want to hear about, and it's also really complicated and really technical. And I think there's something attractive about that to tech geeks, But in terms of the learning curve stuff, I don't think that people are just being obstinate. I don't think people are just being averse to change. I think there is a certain amount of, just human limitation to what people are being tasked with and the amount of information they're expected to take in and the amount of time they have to take it in. And I do think that, you can't necessarily stop change or slow it down, but, it's all well and good to say move fast and break things. But I was talking to a guy from an investment bank last night who, has systems that feed into his country's reserve finance systems, and he's talking about how if any of these systems breaks, it could affect the economy of his entire country. So it's real easy to say move fast and break things, but when you're in that guy's position, it's way easier said than done.
Point. That's a great point. And one of the challenges is we think everything's binary. So here's this one operating model that applies to everyone. And what I've seen successful is, hey, we have financial transactions. There's a different operating model for that. We don't want to move all that fast there. We don't want to change 20 times a day. But I have these web developers who are building our .com site, and I need that to change all the time. So there's a different operating model for them. And then I have all this third-party stuff, and there's probably no IT there, so we kind of need to give them white glove service. And I think that's where companies go wrong, is they create one operating model that says everyone has to adhere to this. And the advice is categorized. There's different categories of apps that each have their own speed and their own risk, and then treat them like that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's not binary. It's not like move fast and break things means you need to take your existing mission-critical applications and break it and figure out how to change them. But it's about having that mindset so that slowly as you build newer applications or as you slowly move out from the legacy applications, you have that mindset so that you sort of like ingrain in yourself that kind of a evolutionary mindset. Unless you have that, you are going to be disrupted. Like if you are going to go only with the mindset that, okay, hey, this is mission critical, I cannot touch it, I cannot break it, then you are going to be disrupted sooner than later.
So I just have a quick question about something. I'm curious from Mike and maybe Torsten, you can comment on this. Are you seeing buying patterns change for technologies at all? I mean, are you seeing are people, configuration management, for example, right? It's been very popular for many years. Are the patterns changing there for purchasing and, adoption of the technologies?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think what's changing a lot is the procurement process. So I've been involved with a lot of cloud transformations, and some CTO will get up in front of the board and say, betting tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on this. So they have milestones. And first milestones, I got to get this done in 3 months, but the procurement process takes 6 months to buy this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't work, right? So I see a lot of trying to change the way we think about procuring. Obviously, licensing
That's a big part of it,
changes.
yeah.
In that case, because this guy just bet $100 million, he has a lot of buying power.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I see it changing the whole, but there's a lot of big transformational initiatives, and with that becomes a buying power within that budget.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned the word artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence.
Everyone laughs.
But what I'm saying with that is, it's a big catalyst that we are seeing. If you're asking what we're observing with customers and in our own company, and you'll see it too, if you start exploring large set of data, right? You think, woo, this is so incredible. I can learn so much about my customers. So you drill into this. I did this with a global beer database over the weekend, 44,000 beer reviews. And so I can create profiles of individual groups who like similar kinds of beers and build some really interesting predictions from that. But what I'm saying with this from an infrastructure perspective is that I couldn't actually do that because I did not have the resources. I would have needed too many environments, but I would have only needed them for the weekend, right? We would have had them even at my moderately sized firm. I could have used those, but they were being used for something else, and we don't have the automation capability. We don't have the capability to just swap them in, give me the resources, and swap them back out again. So we see really artificial intelligence as a huge topic where people want to build and train models, and they need resources. And if they don't get the resources internally, they have to rent them from some of the cloud providers. And every time we talk about citizen developers, we have to also see, I'm a citizen developer, right? So I make 10 times as many copies of the data and try 20 times as much as somebody who knows what they're doing, right? So meaning that I run into dead ends with my personal or team projects quite frequently because I don't have the level of automation in my infrastructure. And that's what we see as a big catalyst to upgrade the infrastructure, because the cost of just saying, nah, buy all my GPUs from IBM or from Amazon or from somebody else, just globally buy them all and then don't optimize the use. That causes a lot of cost, and companies have to do something internal, and we see some movement in the boring server market and in neighboring markets that help make this more flexible, right? Like composable infrastructure, you use it for training a machine learning model overnight, and then during daytime you run your financial management system on it and things like that. Nobody probably in this room does that, but that's a conversation that we have quite a bit.
We really got to finish up, but I'd like to just ask a last question. Maybe each one of you can answer it down the line. What's the most innovative technology you're seeing in the DevOps arena right now? Krish?
The most innovative technology I'm seeing is a topic you touched upon recently, which is applying machine learning models on observability data.
Yeah.
I think that also ties back to one of the previous questions that came from the gentleman about DevOps per se. Like I don't see DevOps, though most of the people talk about DevOps as breaking the silos, bringing developers and making developers and operations people become huggers and all that. I don't believe in that because if you have the right abstraction, if you give the right set of APIs for developers to work with, these two teams can be in silos but still work much more effectively and collaboratively. In order to do that, I think using machine learning on all these monitoring data, or even if you are in advanced stage observability data and stuff like that, will help you deliver that kind of interface where you can still keep the operations team doing what they are good at and developers team doing what they are good at. You can define it using the right interfaces, and you can also do postmortem in a much more data-driven way.
Yeah.
I think that's where the future is going to be.
Beth?
Observability would also be my answer. Just did a piece on serverless monitoring and the tools for observability in those highly complex distributed systems. And the concept of observability versus monitoring, where monitoring you know alerts you to problems, but observability is the system describing itself to you on an ongoing basis. I think that is where there's a lot of technological innovation inside and outside of AI and machine learning. And that's where I think, to Krish's point, dev and ops teams kind of are able to share interfaces and share a common understanding of the systems that they're managing.
Mike?
So it's not sexy anymore, but I think it's database as a service. And I've spent too many years trying to stand up data warehouses and all that stuff. And what you can do on the cloud is phenomenal. Now, there's still a lot of enterprises that use Cloud Air and Hortonworks on-prem because there's all kinds of security limitations, but those are being addressed one by one. And if you look at where these offerings are now, I kind of question why anyone would want to build their own data warehouse or data lake or data mart when you could stand that up literally in days in the cloud for a fraction of the cost. And we actually had a customer where we migrated them from, I won't name the vendor, but from an open source on-prem Hadoop product where they've been on it for 2 years and most of the time was patching, maintaining, and standing up that stack. We moved them to AWS using EMR, using basically a variety of database as a service. And now they're standing up at conferences talking about what the data scientists are doing. They basically unlocked the business. So, you know, and even in the relational database management as a service, you know, I hate to be a DBA who only patches and manages software anymore and not a data architect, because that's a commodity and, you know, these vendors are doing it for you.
Torsten?
So I'm going to say test automation. There's some really interesting products out there that imitate, I'm sure you have all played Mario Kart, where you have the different characters. And so, you know, the grumpy German who, you know, doesn't really like it when stuff is not tidy and a little bit slow versus other types of user profiles. They basically use artificial intelligence to imitate those different users and how they use the software and then report back. It's almost virtual characters built on artificial intelligence created. It's basically training criteria or different characters, yeah. So test automation would be my long-winded answer.
We gotta go. We gotta finish up. But thank you everyone for coming here. Thank you to the panelists. Have a great show, ChefConf.